Sure.
Okay, great. So welcome to the Zoom meeting of the Rotary E-Club of Houston. I'm Robin Charlesworth, the president this year. And I thought it'd be fun to share some experiences about traveling in the world and museums that we have discovered. So I looked up on, I guess it's TripAdvisor to see the best museums in the world. And as I read off these top 10, kind of count on your fingers. You've got 10 fingers each. So count how many of these you have actually been to, okay? Number one, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. That was number one on everyone's hit list that I looked at in top 10. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans.
Oh,
Anybody been
that's
to
a good
that
one.
one?
I've heard about it.
Ed and I have been. So I guess he's nonverbal. He's on my computer. The Musée d'Orsay in Paris.
Oh. Is
Good.
that the Louvre? Is that the Louvre?
That's not the
No,
Louvre.
that's okay.
There's another top 10 museums in Paris. I'm not going to go through tonight. They've got awesome museums there. Then the Art Institute of Chicago,
Oh yeah.
Chicago, of course. And then the State Hermitage Museum and the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Ed and I have been on that one. That is exceptional. It's really fantastic. And then the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum in New York City. And then the National Museum, this is number 7, National Museum of Anthropology. This is in Mexico City. Mike, you do some business there. That might be worth checking out sometime.
Yeah.
Okay. Then in Athens, Greece, Acropolis Museum. And then the Prado National Museum in Madrid, Spain. And then in London, the Victoria and Albert Museum. So how many points does everybody have? Hold up your fingers. 2, 3, okay. Well, Ed, had you been to the 9/11 Museum? Okay, I think it's maybe bigger. It's all underground now, and I haven't seen that, but anyway, I thought it would be kind of interesting to see who has been to these many of these top 10. I am going to share about the Vasa Museum, which is one of the top European museums in Stockholm. And let's see, who would like to start tonight with the museum story?
Well, I'd like to start and explain that the dog ate my homework. No. Honestly, I was happy that I had this done for the last meeting, and I had it on my computer upstairs. And Saturday, I went to update it, and my computer just it stopped. It wouldn't turn on. And so today I found out that I need a new motherboard. So I am without my homework today. This is my laptop, but I will be ready for the next event. I promise.
Okay, great. Mike, do you have one to share?
I could do that, I suppose. I didn't do any homework either, but I did do a quick search on the photo album and found one that I can talk about through photos. And so if you'll allow me to share the screen, I will show you that. Let me see here for a second. And I'm going to and where it is Xi'an, China, and it's more famously known as the Terracotta Warriors Museum. And I don't know if any of you have been to that. We had the opportunity to go in 2012 with a delegation from the American Society of Civil Engineers. And so or ASCE, and I'm a member of ASCE. And so we had a delegation of about say 22 or 23 engineers from all over the US in different specialties. And my specialty, as you can probably tell by a couple of these photos, are towers. So, but we had other engineers with water, sanitation, buildings engineers, anything related to civil engineering, which is a pretty broad category. But so we were able to go and visit three cities, Beijing, Xi'an, and Shanghai, and meet with the university professors of engineering schools in those cities, which was quite fascinating. And I don't know if you remember, at that time there was a fire in Shanghai in one of the very large buildings that was under construction. But in Shanghai, I know this is a little aside, but in Shanghai they have they're building so many buildings. There were something like 40 construction projects going on at one time in the city at that time, and one of them caught on fire, but there were residents in the lower areas of the building, and that made the news. I don't know if you remember that, but it caused. They use a sheathing when they build a building and they're doing the construction. They start at the bottom and they work their way up to the top, and so they were on the top floors. A fire started, and the protective sheeting barrier that surrounded the building was made of a plastic material, which is outlawed in the U.S., but in China they hadn't outlawed it. And some of the material caught on fire and dropped down into the lower floors that were vacated, that had residences in them, and they were occupied. And so, of course, some people died, and that happened just about 3 or 4 blocks from where we were. But let's talk about museum for a second. I digressed a little bit. I apologize. So there's the Terracotta Warriors, and I only have a few photos of that. There's a museum out front, and what I'll first say about this location is it's probably one of the world's most largest archaeological sites in the world that is still yet to be explored. When we were there in 2012, they had unearthed these pits, and here's a photo of one of the pits. They have 3 separate pits. Now this is just one pit, and in the pit, this is not part of the museum per se, but it is where the museum pieces come from. So these are the Terracotta Warriors, and each one weighs anywhere from 300 to 400 pounds. So they're actually larger than life size, a little bit larger. They all are made individually, and they recently have done a study on the to determine if they use maybe one mold for certain things like the ears. And for example, they did a survey of just the ears by doing a photographic digital 3D imaging survey, and then they compared the different ears from some of the individuals, and not one was alike. So that tells you that each statue is unique and has different hairstyles and different features, and you can see some of that. There's also horses, there's chariots, there's just a sea of these things. It's so overwhelming when you see it that you just can't believe how many how many are there really there. Some of them have damage, as you can see, so they're in the process of restoring. But this will be a multi-decade effort, really. But the site itself, and there's Dri, the site itself, this is just one pit. As I mentioned, there's 2 other pits, and then there's a burial mound, which is like a mountain, and that they figure that's where the king or of the Qin dynasty, and he was the one in China that united all of the other tribes in China together, and under one rule. So he's best known for that, and his legacy is this buried treasure, and that was found in the 40s or I think it was in the 40s. Oh, we lost them. Maybe they're going to come back though. um, and so the other thing that's interesting is each person, not every one of them, but many in the front have these they're holding a rod or a spear, and the wooden spear, of course, it degraded and disintegrated, but the tips of the spear are still of course they're recovered, and they identified, welcome back. And they've done studies on the spear tips and determined that and arrow tips. I mean, these are real weapons that were found here in the pit. So there's crossbow weapons, there's spear tips, and special knives and swords. And none of them have been used, but they're all authentic. They're all real weapons. And then, of course, there's horses that were full-size horses. And just a little bit about the armor. Of course, the armor was interesting too, but you can see everything's pretty much the same color. But what they have recently found is that each one of the statues was actually painted a pigment, a unique pigment. So they had, their face colors were unique. They had, some were darker than others. So they were like a full spectrum of the Chinese at that time. With the uniforms were also multicolored, and so they're remaining to find many things. There's the Qin period. And let me just skip ahead a little bit because I don't want to take too much of your time. And it's as I say, it's an archaeological site. So here are the workers taking the statues and cataloging and taking photos and measuring and logging each statue as they get excavated. And as I was saying, this is probably just the tip of the iceberg. They imagine that when they start excavating the big mountain that's adjacent to these pits, that they'll find huge riches, because he's known, the king there is known to, or the emperor I should say, is known to be buried in there, or is it's documented that he's buried. And when he was buried there, it's written that he was buried with a model of the city and with rivers of mercury that simulated the rivers. So and that's going to be, they've decided not to excavate that until they can be assured that they won't damage it when they start going in. Okay, let me.
I was there in October, and I do believe that you had a much more personal tour than we did.
Oh, well, we went in, yeah, and here's some of the things inside the museum you probably saw. All the artifacts and that area there out front of the museum itself is very nice too.
That was a real highlight for us. Can you hear all that feedback?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then you probably saw the chariot that
Yeah.
the bronze chariot. The other thing I'll mention, the last thing I'll mention, is there is a NOVA that talks about the latest excavation, and that just aired, I think, last month. So if you go to pbs.org and you log on there, you can actually watch the NOVA program on this site, which is fascinating. Gives some more information about it. So that's my little brief presentation.
I'm going to switch computers so I can do, I think I have sound on my computer. I'm going to share with them about the Vasa Museum in Stockholm.
Okay.
See if, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, I think I got this working.
Hey, all right.
Thank you. Are you going, or are you going to let me do it? There it is. Okay.
So how do you share your whole screen?
Well, you have to go back to the other page. Okay, so I'm going to do the screen sharing now. There at the bottom.
This?
Let's see. Where's the screen sharing?
It's on the bottom. It's a green button.
Green button. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so I found a nice little video, and I thought I would play this about the Vasa, but this was quite interesting to have gone to the trouble and the expense to build the greatest warship of the time in the 1600s and then have it sink as soon as it left the harbor. But they actually, 98% of this is original, and only 2% is new material. So they were able to recover it because it was still in shallow water and then well preserved. But here's a little bit about the story of the Vasa Museum.
On August 10th, 1628, this was the most powerful weapon in the world. 20 minutes later, it was at the bottom of Stockholm Harbour. There aren't any physical signs of damage. The wood hasn't been set ablaze, ripped apart by a reef, or blown apart with cannons. So why did this warship never see war? Who sank the Vasa? Let's relive the fateful day of the sinking. After being dragged along the eastern shorefront from the Stepsgarden shipyard, the Vasa was ready to take sail. Named for his family, the Vasa dynasty, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden was anxious for it to join him, fighting in the 30 Years' War. On board are sailors and their families, while along the shore, thousands waited to see the flagship of the Swedish Navy take to the seas. All the gun ports along both the lower and upper decks are opened, ready to fire a salute as the ship leaves Stockholm. After unfurling her sails, she makes her way steadily through the port. Just as she rounds Beckhollen Island, a strong gust of wind makes the ship bank heavily to port. In fact, so far does she lean that the lower gun ports become submerged. As water rushes in, the fate of the ship is sealed, and she sinks in a matter of minutes. Since they hadn't gone very far, most of the passengers and crew make it safely back to shore, where the captain is immediately arrested. Sofri Hansen swears that everything had been tied down properly, and that his crew was sober. So if the sailors weren't to blame, why did she sink? All ocean vessels operate under the same two forces, weight and buoyancy. To see how these interact, I've created this demonstration. The top tank is filled with water. If any of it gets displaced, it's going to spill out and into the larger container. We'll be able to measure the weight of displaced water using a set of scales. This is an analog for the Vasa ship. It weighs in at precisely 37 grams. When we place it into the tank, some of the water spills out. How much water? 37 grams of it. We're now adding
Principle.
about 65 grams of it. The extra weight pulls the boat down further, but it doesn't sink. At the same time, more water spills out. How much water? About 65 grams. As you can see, the mass of water displaced is always the same as the mass of the object. That's because displaced water generates buoyancy, which is opposed by the object's mass, which generates weight. In the end, the boat sinks just far enough to exactly counter the extra mass. It was 1625, and King Gustavus had a problem. Up until the 17th century, the Swedish Navy had focused on smaller, faster vessels, well suited for the boarding rather than outright sinking of ships. However, as cannon technology advanced, he saw an opportunity for a new type of warfare. When, during the height of the 30 Years' War, 10 of his ships sank during a storm, Gustavus informed his shipwrights that they would be building a new flagship, using the latest in technology. The Vasa was equipped with 64 cannons across 2 gun decks, including 48 of these 24-pounders. At the time, this was the Baltic's largest concentration of artillery on a single vessel. But flagships aren't just about firepower, they're also political statements. You can see on this 1/10 scale replica the brightly coloured ornamentation of the Vasa. Scenes from Roman and Greek antiquity are intertwined with figures from the Old Testament, as well as ancient Egypt. All of this propaganda and extra cannons puts a lot of mass high up in the ship. Just having equal forces isn't enough. They've also got to be balanced. In its initial configuration, our boat is really stable. That's because the cargo makes the weight force act through a point that's lower than the buoyancy force. If we tilt it to the side, these forces generate a restorative torque back to the center. On the other hand, if we were to increase the height of the cargo, then it's a lot less stable. Buoyancy acts through the same point, but now the weight force is much higher up. If the ship tips even a little, then this tilt gets magnified. We can prevent tipping in 2 ways. Lower the center of mass by adding in more weight lower down, or by making the base wider so that it must lean further before falling over. When Gustavus ordered the Vasa to be built, the shipwrights had already started construction on a smaller vessel. Rather than wasting the resources, instead they just extended the already formed keel by 8 meters, bringing total ship length up to 70. In order to compensate for this instability, they added as much ballast as possible. However, the narrower profile of the ship made it much less effective. After 120 tons were added, the ship was sailing too low in the water. Any more mass, and the water would start to spill through the gun ports. Before the Vasa could launch, it had to pass a lurch test. This involves having 30 men run side to side along the deck, making the ship rock back and forth. By doing so, we can infer the relative positioning of the weight and buoyancy forces. In Pirates of the Caribbean, they use an especially exaggerated form of this test to flip the Black Pearl. After just 3 traversals, it was decided that the Vasa was lurching way too far, and the test had to be abandoned. For comparison, it took Jack Sparrow and his crew more than 10 times that amount before their ship would sink. At this stage, someone should probably have told the engineers, or even the king, that the ship was unseaworthy. However, it appears the message never got through, and with Gustavus at war and anxious for the Vasa to join him, the launch date was set for August 10th. The rest, as they say, is history. So, at the end of the day, who sank the Vasa? The official inquest found that no one was to blame. The captain was just sailing a ship that had indeed passed a test, and was built to specifications outlined by the king himself. Were the courts really going to accuse the most powerful man in Sweden of sinking his own warship? Probably not. We've just reached 500 subscribers. Thanks to everyone for all of your support and for joining me on this journey. Looking forward, we're going to continue producing episodes of Engineering Europe, but since I'm about to head back home, Perth Science is also going to join the mix. Until then, this has been James Tingley from Atomic Frontier. Take care. On August 10th, 1628, this was the most powerful weapon in the world.
Okay.
20 minutes later,
not
it
stop
was at the
that.
bottom of Stockholm Harbour. There aren't any
How do I
visible
stop
signs of damage.
There you go.
There. Okay.
So we just found that museum really fun to explore. They have 7 different floors of the museum, so you can see all different levels, of the ship and the detail and the beauty of all the carving. It was just really quite interesting to see. And I had some other notes here I wanted to share about it. Let's see if I can get to these notes. Okay, so there. The museum receives about 1.5 million visitors every year. And then, let's see, this was interesting too about the cost. It was like, how much did it cost to have this vessel brought back up to the surface and to restore it? And actually there was like no cost to Sweden for this, because they used it for training with the military, and some things were donated. So there really was no cost to bringing it up and setting it up, for the museum, which I thought was really quite interesting. Okay, then let's see. Don't have all my notes. I don't know if that's going to block me there. Okay, so there were 64 cannons on board. Only 3 of them are in the museum. So I don't know what happened to all those other cannons. But I remember the long walk that we had back to the cruise ship after we left the Vasa Museum. The cruise ship harbor is not really close. And we just kept walking and walking, and we finally made it back. But I don't know how many steps we had that day, but we did well on our exercise that day for sure. But it was really a beautiful museum, and highly recommend, if you get to go to Stockholm, to have this on your list. There's a series of maritime museums, so there are several others as well that are all part of this. But this is definitely worth the time. And I think I bought our grandson a book about the ship also. He was probably a little too young for it then, but he's starting to read now. So I think that this is something maybe I'll read when we go up there for his 6th birthday soon. Okay, Ed, would you like to share about a museum?
Sure. Let me see if I can unmute. You want to mute?
We're going to be going to Stockholm after the conference in Hamburg. That's immediately after that we'll be going. So we'll go look at that museum. That'll be good.
Yes, I'll have a chance to see it. Good.
Yeah, we really enjoyed that. I'm gonna share a little bit about a museum in France that we just love. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. There was a toss-up. We came across a museum purely by chance when we were visiting an exchange student near Limoges, France. And I won't go into the details of this, but if you get the chance, there is a museum that is just pretty incredible. Okay, so am I sharing anything? Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. So anyway, this Nazi massacre village, Oradour-sur-Glane, this museum is underground. The Germans, as they were retreating, they got all the villagers and they locked the women and children into the church, and the men were locked into another building, and they exterminated them all. And to make a museum out of this, the French have chosen to leave everything in place the way it was after the Germans left the village, and they actually have an underground museum, but the whole village is the same as it was in 1944 when this happened. Cars are still wrecked and everything. So I just, that was just sort of something that surprised Robin and I. There was a Rotarian that had a hotel, and we were going to visit our exchange student the next day in Limoges, and we asked him what we should do, and he said, "Oh, you should see this." So it's a great Rotary story. But I always like France, and I always like the museums in Paris. And if you look around our house, you'll see a lot of unicorn tapestries on plates, on tapestries, even in chairs. We've got them, and the iconographic aspects of the Lady and the Unicorn it's just always fascinated me. So I'll just do a quick.
Et en général, les spécialistes des tentures ont un peu escamoté ce problème. On n'en parle pas beaucoup. Il me semble très très important.
L'autre grand pan d'interrogation, sinon de mystère concernant ces tapisseries, c'est celui de leur iconographie. Que représente-t-elle?
La licorne est un animal évidemment un peu mystérieux et poétique, onirique. La légende veut qu'elle ne puisse être capturée que par une jeune fille vierge. C'est un animal qui a beaucoup à voir avec la pureté, parfois l'innocence, la chasteté. Mais on peut faire des tentures une interprétation psychanalytique et sexuelle, mais on peut aussi y voir autre chose, et notamment, on l'a dit depuis longtemps, des allégories des cinq sens.
Nous avons 5 sens, mais il y a 6 tapisseries. L'iconographie sur le mode de l'allégorie, c'est-à-dire de figures, en l'occurrence de figures féminines, qui représentent, qui incarnent en quelque sorte nos 5 sens, est une hypothèse qui a été émise au début du XXe siècle.
Et ceux qui admettent que le thème, ce sont les 5 sens, sont un peu gênés par la 6e tenture. Pourquoi 6 et pas 5? Et alors, en général, soulignent qu'il s'agit de la synthèse des 5 premières, et les 5 sens réunis débouchent alors sur toutes sortes d'idées, la perfection, la totalité.
On pourrait citer Michel Serres, par exemple, le célèbre philosophe, qui explique qu'il faut bien un sens interne par lequel le sujet se retourne sur soi. Et
Okay, I'm going to stop it here for the sake of Texas name. But I love the museums in France, but especially, well, Senenchois and just the tapestries, the medieval tapestries have always fascinated me. So again, when you come to our house, you look around and you get to see some of the medieval influences that we bought from the museum. Obviously reproductions of the tapestries, but you get a chance, go to the Cluny in Paris, France, and partake of the medieval museum. That's all I have.
That's interesting.
Hey, Robin,
I'm coming back to get my phone.
are you I want to get
Oh yeah, the Texas Tech's playing tonight, isn't it?
They
Let me
are
just get
indeed.
on yours. Okay, I'll just come back to Ed.
And Virginia, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And since we have one daughter that's a Red Raider,
Oh.
Very exciting to watch. Okay. Something else here I wanted to share. Okay. Yeah. and Top 10 weird museums in the world. This will always be fun. In Houston, we have an art car museum. I think their big parade was last weekend. It's small, but entertaining. That's a fun one. In Houston, we also have a funeral museum. But there's a museum in Rome, the Museum of the Holy Souls in Purgatory.
Hmm.
And then also there's a Museum of Death in the US. And yeah, the catacombs in France, we have them too. That was quite interesting. That was one of the top 10 in Paris. If you're into parasites, there's a museum in Japan, the Meguro Parasitological Museum, and it's in Tokyo. The Cockroach Hall of Fame and Museum is in Texas. Let's see, are we still screen sharing?
Yeah.
We'll stop that. Okay,
Yeah,
there we go.
there you go.
Let's see. I don't know exactly where that is in Texas, but there's a Museum of Bad Art, and that's in Massachusetts. And then the Paris Sewers Museum. I'm not going to try to say that in French. There's a Museum of Broken Relationships in Croatia. At our social, a luncheon social, the end of this month, we'll have a visitor Rotarian from Croatia. I'll have to ask him if he's seen this museum. And then a Museum of Human Disease in Australia. In Turkey, a hair museum. And does anybody else have any weird museums to add to this conversation?
I can tell you. Oh, go ahead, Charles.
No, I was just going to say it would really help because I couldn't write all these down. If you have the list, if you would share your list of museums and locations, that would just be helpful for talking points when you talk to someone that's going somewhere and can say, hey, check out this museum and bring back some pictures, and that'll be just a good talking point if you have that you could share.
Okay, we can add that in a newsletter.
The museum that I was going to talk about was the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris, and it's in the. Have you seen it? It's in the Louvre. The building, it's in the Louvre building, but it's chairs and furniture from the 20s and 30s, that period, and that's something that we are both like interior design in one place we went. So, but that's all I'll tell you because I have the pictures. I hope when I get my computer back.
Yeah, this is actually a topic that a lot of people had interest in, and we might repeat it so that we can explore some different museums. Or
Good.
it might be on aquariums. We've been to aquariums around the world,
Oh, good.
so that would also.
Another topic is churches, like churches of the world, and eclectic or strange ones, which reminded me when you asked for strange museums, I thought of the church. And it's, as you know, I'm from Portland, and Portland has the one and only Church of Elvis. And so what I could do is just show you what it looks like. This is the Church of Elvis. All it is a, it's in a little cubby hole inside of a building, and that's it. You really can't go inside it. You just look at it from the sidewalk, and that's basically it.
Yeah, another topic that might be interesting is music around the world. Like
music around the world, yeah.
The Portuguese music, fado, and to share some different excerpts from some music that we've heard around the world that might also be interesting.
There's another one that I just remembered, and that was and I know you want to go, Ed, because you want to watch the basketball game. But when we were in Portugal, in Lisbon, we went to the now I can't find the photos, but it's the Museum of Tiles or Porcelain Tiles. And so we went through that, and that was pretty fascinating, and lots to see in tiles. I had no idea that you could see so much about tiles, but a lot of that porcelain tiles, they came from Lisbon, that area, and were exported, all over the world. So that was fascinating to see that.
I went to a tile factory where they hand paint the tiles in the Azores. The island we were on was Terceira, and I actually was able to hand paint a tile. Then touched it up, and so it really looks good. So it was delivered to our hotel the next day after the professional put finishing touches on it.
Yeah, we brought one back from Lisbon, one of these little tiles that was hand painted. And I don't know, it maybe lasted 6 months or so before it was dropped and yeah, chipped or so. I think it's still, I think we still have it. It's just not perfect, not in perfection anymore. It's not a museum piece.
Well, neither is mine. Okay. Well, that was a fun meeting, and let's record that. And Mike, either you or we can send it to Win so that we can put it on the website or WhatsApp and share it with other club members.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, very good. We have a board meeting this coming Saturday,
Mhm.
and it's always an open board meeting. So if anyone wants to join us that's not currently on the board, you're always welcome. And I understand, Mike, are you progressing on your board?
I have everyone. In fact, Charles has agreed to be secretary, so I'm happy for that. And still looking for treasurer, but and of course Isis is it will be incoming president then after me. So we're happy about that. Yeah.
Okay, coming along.
Yeah.
Not done with this year yet. This has been an awesome year. I hope that we can get more people to come to the district conference, and then that'll be the first weekend in May. So we'll have another Zoom meeting in a couple of weeks, and I may have to pinch hit on that because that was going to be Nicole Weisislow talking
Oh
about
yeah.
the village. So I may invite some other club members that we have who were born and raised in Africa, and then it will be called Inside Africa. So I know we will have someone from Cameroon, from Ghana. We have traveled to South Africa, and I have to check and see what other countries we'll have. But we have at least 4 that we can cover, kind of an inside story.
Good.
So I think that will be an interesting topic too.
Yeah.
So we'll look forward to that in a couple of weeks, and I'll send out a reminder again about the meeting, and it's on the first page of our April calendar. So you can check that anytime. But thank you for your attention tonight, and everyone have a great week.
Okay,
You
good
too.
to see you all.
Good to see you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.